How do you mourn a man you realize you never truly knew? For 3 months, the silence in the cabin had been Elara Vance's only answer. The Georgia woods pressed in, a wall of sound her husband Thomas had understood. For her, it was just noise. The house was a museum of his absence. His worn boots stood by the door, still holding the shape of his feet. His favorite flannel shirt hung on a hook, smelling faintly of sawdust and the outdoors. Elara, a woman who had spent her life analyzing art and history, now found herself lost in the geography of her own home. The grief was a physical weight, but the dust gathering in his workshop was worse. It felt like a betrayal. Today, she would face it. She pulled open the heavy wooden door. The air was thick with the scent of motor oil and old pine. Tools hung on the pegboard in perfect order, a testament to a man who believed in a place for everything. Everything, it seemed, except the small, rusted lockbox tucked away on a high shelf, behind a stack of old hunting magazines. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Thomas had no secrets, or so she had believed. Her slender fingers, more used to turning the delicate pages of ancient books, fumbled with the clasp. It wouldn't budge. She found a heavy-duty flathead screwdriver, one of his. She wedged the tip into the seam. With a grunt of effort, she twisted. Metal scraped. The lock popped open with a sharp crack that echoed in the quiet workshop. Inside, there was no money, no hidden documents. There was only a single, leather-bound field journal. Before we continue, let us know from which city you are. We are interested to know from where our videos are watched. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your rating. This gives us motivation to make new and interesting videos. So, let's get started. Elara carried the journal back into the house as if it were a fragile artifact. She sat at the large oak table he had built and opened it. The pages were filled with his familiar, strong handwriting. But he wasn't writing about hunting. He was writing about watching. The entries detailed the life of a female bobcat. He had sketched her with surprising skill. He noted her hunting patterns, the way she moved through the undergrowth, the color of her coat in the changing light. He had even given her a name. Ghost, he called her. Because she was there, and then she was not. The journal spanned 2 years. Elara's hands began to tremble as she read on. Thomas, the respected hunter, the man who provided venison for their freezer each winter, had a secret. He was feeding Ghost. Small scraps of meat, left on a specific flat-topped boulder at the very edge of their property line. He wrote about his conflict, his guilt. He wondered if he was upsetting a delicate balance. He described her intelligence, her caution. He saw her raise a litter of kittens, watching from a distance with his binoculars. Elara pressed a hand to her mouth. This was a side of her husband she had never glimpsed, a secret tenderness he had kept entirely for the woods. That night, she couldn't sleep. The silence of the cabin felt different. It was no longer empty. It was filled with a question. Driven by an impulse she didn't understand, she went to the freezer. She pulled out a small packet of venison trimmings he had saved. Her hands shook as she put on her coat and walked out into the cold October night. The moon was bright, illuminating the path to the woods. She found the boulder exactly where he had described it. It was large and gray, covered in lichen. With a deep breath, she placed the meat on its surface and retreated back to the house, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the quiet hum of the forest. For a week, nothing happened. Every morning, Elara would walk to the edge of the woods. Every morning, the meat was still there, untouched, sometimes pecked at by birds. A cold disappointment began to settle in her chest. It was a foolish idea. a desperate attempt to connect with a ghost of her own. She was about to give up. On the 8th day, she walked out with her morning coffee, expecting the same result. But the boulder was different. The meat was gone, and in its place, lying perfectly in the center of the stone, was a single, brilliant blue jay feather. Alara stared at it. The wind could have done it, a complete coincidence. She told herself that, but she didn't believe it. The placement was too deliberate, too precise. That night, she left more food. The next morning, it was gone. This time, a smooth, white quartz stone sat on the boulder, gleaming in the early light. The ritual had begun. It became the new anchor of her days. She would wake up, a flutter of anticipation in her chest, and walk to the boulder. Sometimes there was a gift, sometimes not. A piece of vibrant green moss, a small shed deer antler tine, a shard of old colored glass worn smooth by a creek. They were the small treasures of the forest, insignificant things that began to feel like a conversation. She started her own journal, taping the feather to the first page. She documented each gift, sketching it beside her entry. For the first time in 3 months, the oppressive weight on her chest began to lift, replaced by a fragile, tentative wonder. The silence was no longer her enemy. It was listening. The change in her was subtle, but not invisible. One afternoon, her nearest neighbor, Garrett Caldwell, pulled his dusty Ford pickup to a stop at the end of her driveway. Garrett was a third-generation poultry farmer whose family had owned the adjacent land for a century. He was a man made of pragmatism and hard work, with little time for sentiment. He tipped his worn baseball cap. "Ilara," he said, his voice a low rumble. "How you holding up?" "I'm all right, Garrett. Thank you for asking." He squinted, his gaze drifting from her towards the tree line. "Been having some trouble," he said, not unkindly. "Lost a couple of chickens last week. Found feathers near the fence line. Looks like a bobcat. They're getting bold this year." Ilara's blood ran cold. She kept her face neutral. "Oh? I haven't seen anything." Garrett's eyes narrowed slightly. He had the sharp, observant gaze of a man who reads the land for a living. "Well, just be careful. Folks get the wrong idea about these animals. Start leaving out food, trying to be friendly. They're not pets. You teach them not to fear people, you're just signing their death warrant and inviting trouble for everyone else." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "You see anything, you let me know." He put the truck in gear and drove off, leaving a cloud of dust and a heavy warning in his wake. The confrontation left her shaken. Garrett's words were a splash of cold, practical reality on her fragile new world. But they also made her defiant. This was her connection, hers and Thomas's. It was a private language, a thread of comfort in the vast emptiness of her grief. She wouldn't let him take it from her. That night, she left a slightly larger portion of venison on the boulder. A mix of fear and defiance churned in her stomach. She felt a fierce, protective instinct swell within her. For the unseen animal, for her husband's secret, for this strange, silent ritual that was keeping her afloat. The next morning, she approached the boulder with more trepidation than usual. The food was gone. What lay in its place made her stop dead. It was not a stone or a feather. Lying neatly on the gray, lichen-covered surface was a rabbit. It was freshly killed, its body still limp, its fur unruffled. A single drop of blood glistened like a ruby on its white chest. The sight was both gruesome and profound. It was a stark, brutal reminder of the animal's true nature. The this wasn't a storybook creature. It was a predator, a killer. Her stomach turned. For a moment, she saw what Garrett saw, a dangerous pest. She almost turned and ran back to the safety of her house, ready to end the ritual for good. But then she remembered Thomas's journal. She rushed inside, her hands shaking as she flipped through the worn pages. And there it was, an entry from a year ago. "Ghost brought a squirrel to the stone today," he had written. "Left it right where I leave the food. It feels less like a trade and more like sharing, acknowledging a provider, a strange sort of kinship." Ilara read the words over and over. A strange sort of kinship. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning. It was an offering. A deeper form of communication in the only language the animal knew. It was a sign of inclusion. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she walked back outside. She looked at the dead rabbit not with horror, but with a new, unsettling understanding. This was the wilderness, unfiltered. And somehow, she was being invited in. The peace she felt after this realization was deep, but short-lived. 2 days later, as she was sketching the rabbit's form in her journal before burying it, she heard the crunch of tires on her gravel driveway. It wasn't Garrett's rumbling truck. The sound was wrong, smoother. She looked up to see a sleek, dark gray sedan, the kind that belonged in an Atlanta parking garage, not on a mountain road. A woman stepped out. She was dressed in a sharp blazer and dark jeans, looking entirely out of place against the backdrop of autumn woods. It was her daughter, Chloe. Ilara's heart sank. Chloe hadn't said she was coming. A tight, worried expression was etched onto her face, a look Ilara knew all too well. It was the look Chloe got when she was about to take control of a situation. "Mom?" Chloe called out, her voice sharp with concern as she walked towards the porch. "I was just in the area for a deposition. Thought I'd stop by." Ilara knew it was a lie. Chloe never just stopped by. Her eyes scanned the porch, lingering on the open journal, on the half-finished sketch of the rabbit. Her jaw tightened. "Actually," Chloe said, her tone shifting from feigned casualness to direct confrontation. "That's not true. I came because I talked to Garrett Caldwell this morning. He called me, Mom. He's worried. And frankly, so am I. We need to talk about what's really going on here." The air between them crackled. Chloe's concern was a physical force, pressing in on Ilara just as the woods did. Ilara instinctively closed the journal, her hand covering the sketch of the rabbit. "Garrett worries," Ilara said, her voice tight. "It's his nature. His chickens are his livelihood." Chloe took a step closer, her sharp lawyer's eyes missing nothing. "He said you've been leaving food out. He said you're attracting predators to the property line. Mom, what is this?" She gestured towards the journal in Ilara's hands. "Is that what I think it is? Did that thing bring you a dead animal?" Ilara stood up, clutching the journal to her chest like a shield. "You don't understand, Chloe. It's not like that. It's complicated." "Complicated?" Chloe's voice rose, a mixture of disbelief and fear. "The only thing complicated here is why you think it's a good idea to feed a bobcat. I went into Dad's workshop. I saw the lockbox. I know you found his journal." She ran a hand through her perfectly styled hair, messing it up. "I thought it would help you, reading his words. Not this. This is an obsession. It's not healthy." The words stung. Ilara flinched as if struck. "It's a connection," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's the only thing that has made sense since he died." "No," Chloe said, her voice softening slightly, but losing none of its steel. "A connection is calling me. A connection is letting me help you. This is a fantasy. You're living in a fantasy, Mom, and it's dangerous. For you and for the animal. What happens when it loses its fear completely? What happens when it scratches you? Or worse? Chloe began to pace the wooden porch, her heels clicking an anxious rhythm. Garrett is a reasonable man, but he's on edge. He thinks you're being reckless, and he's right. She stopped and faced her mother, her expression pleading. Let me see the journal. Let me see both of them. Reluctantly, Alara surrendered them. Chloe sat down at the oak table and began to read. She started with Thomas's journal, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then she opened Alara's. She saw the taped-in feather, the sketches of the stones, the emotional, wondering prose. Her face hardened. When she finally looked up, her eyes were filled with a terrible, clinical pity. Mom, she said, her voice flat. You've built a shrine to a wild animal. You're assigning it Dad's feelings. You're having conversations with it. You write about it like it's a person, comforting you. It is, Alara protested. In its own way. No. Chloe slammed the journal shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet afternoon. It's a predator that has learned where to get a free meal, that's all. Dad was a hunter. He, of all people, would know the line between observing nature and dangerously interfering with it. She stood up, her decision made. This isn't working. This place, this isolation, it's not good for you. I've been looking at listings. There are some beautiful condos back in Atlanta near me. Lots of community activities, art classes. The suggestion sucked the air from Alara's lungs. Sell the cabin? This house that Thomas built with his own hands? Leave the woods that held the last secret piece of him? No, she said, the word coming out as a choked gasp. Absolutely not. Mom, be reasonable. This is my home, Alara said, her voice gaining strength, fueled by a surge of pure protective rage. This is all I have left of him. You will not take this from me. The silence that followed was heavy and cold. Chloe looked at her mother, truly seeing the unyielding steel in her spine for the first time. She picked up her car keys from the table. I can't make you do anything, she said, her voice tired and defeated. But I won't stand by and watch you disappear into this delusion. Think about what I said. Please. For me. She walked out without looking back, and the sound of her sedan driving away was the loneliest sound Alara had ever heard. The cabin felt huge and empty again. Chloe's words echoed in the silence, cruel and sharp. Delusion, unhealthy, fantasy. Alara looked at her journal, at the carefully sketched stones and feathers. Were they just random objects? Was she just a foolish old woman projecting her grief onto an animal? Garrett's warning, now amplified by Chloe's panic, felt like a closing fist. The joy she had felt was gone, replaced by a cold, gnawing doubt. She had to know. She needed an answer that didn't come from her aching heart, or from a worried daughter, or from a pragmatic farmer. She needed an expert. She went to Thomas's old desk and found a phone book, its pages thin and dry. Under the state government listings, she found it. Georgia Department of Natural Resources, Wildlife Division. Her hand trembled as she dialed the number. She felt a profound sense of betrayal, as if she were turning in Thomas's secret, exposing it to the cold light of bureaucracy. A calm, patient voice answered. She explained her situation haltingly, leaving out the most personal details, focusing only on the animal's behavior. She expected to be dismissed or lectured. Instead, the man on the line listened intently. It's unusual, but not unheard of, he said. My name is Dr. Ben Carter. I'm a wildlife biologist. Would it be all right if I came by to assess the situation? No trouble, I promise. I'm just interested. Relief washed over her. Yes, she said. Please. Dr. Carter arrived the next afternoon. He was a man in his 40s with a kind, weathered face and a calm demeanor that immediately put Alara at ease. He didn't look like a government official. He looked like a man who was more comfortable in the woods than in an office. She offered him coffee, and they sat on the porch. She found herself telling him everything about Thomas, his death, the secret journal, the gifts. She showed him both her journal and her husband's. He listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful. He studied Thomas's sketches and read Alara's entries with genuine interest. May I see the spot? He asked. She led him to the flat-topped boulder. He knelt, examining the surface, the surrounding ground. He picked a good spot, Dr. Carter said softly. Sheltered, good vantage point. The animal would feel safe here. They walked back to the porch and sat down. Mrs. Vance? He began gently. What you're experiencing is a fascinating intersection of animal behavior and human emotion. The bobcat isn't comforting you in the human sense. It's not thinking about your grief. Alara braced herself. What it's doing, he continued, is likely a form of behavior we call caching. Intelligent predators, especially cats, will sometimes store items of interest near a reliable and safe food source. It's not emotional. It's instinctual. The gifts are just interesting objects she's stashing in her pantry, so to speak. He saw the disappointment on her face. Or, he added, it could be a misplaced provisioning instinct. She associates you now with the food. In her world, you might be perceived as a strange, non-threatening member of her. Well, her territory. She's sharing resources, just as she would with her own kin. It's not empathy, but it is a form of recognition, a powerful one. The scientific explanation didn't feel cold, it felt real. It stripped away the magic, but it validated the connection. It wasn't a delusion. The behavior was real. Her experience was real. But it is dangerous, Dr. Carter said, his tone becoming serious. For her, a habituated bobcat is far more likely to have a negative encounter with another human, or a car, or a farmer's dog. Your neighbor, Mr. Caldwell? He has a legitimate concern. The best thing, the kindest thing you can do for this animal is to stop. He gave her instructions on how to slowly wean the cat off the food, to break the cycle. As he was preparing to leave, the sound of a truck engine roaring up the driveway made them both turn. It was Garrett Caldwell's Ford, and it slid to a stop in a spray of gravel. He didn't get out slowly this time. He slammed the door and stomped towards the porch, his face a mask of cold fury. He wasn't wearing his usual baseball cap, and his eyes were blazing. In his right hand, he held a dead chicken by its feet. It was bloody and mangled. This ends now, Alara, he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. He didn't even seem to notice Dr. Carter. He threw the dead bird onto the grass at the foot of the porch steps. I found it 10 minutes ago, right by the fence. Tracks are everywhere, leading straight from your property line. He pointed a thick finger at her. I gave you a warning. You didn't listen. He turned and walked back to his truck, pulling something heavy and metallic from the passenger seat. He held it up. It was a stack of leg-hold traps, their steel jaws and chains glinting ominously in the afternoon sun. The forecast says a big storm's coming through tonight. Garrett said, his voice flat and final. "That cat of yours will be looking for an easy meal before the weather turns. Well, it's going to find one. I'm setting these along my entire property line. Professional grade. This is over." He threw the traps into the bed of his truck with a loud clang, got in, and roared away, leaving Alara frozen on the porch. The biologist's calm warning drowned out by the farmer's deadly promise. The biologist's car had barely disappeared down the driveway when the first fat drops of rain began to fall. They splattered against the dry leaves on the ground, making a sound like scattered applause. Dr. Carter's words echoed in Alara's mind. "The kindest thing you can do for this animal is to stop." But his calm, scientific reasoning was utterly drowned out by the image Garrett had seared into her memory. The glint of steel jaws. The wind began to whip through the trees, a low moan that grew into a howl. Inside the cabin, Alara paced. Every gust of wind that rattled the windows sounded like the snap of a trap. Every branch that scraped against the roof was the sound of a struggle. She pictured Ghost, Thomas's secret, drawn by instinct to find shelter or an easy meal before the storm. She pictured her stepping onto a hidden metal plate. She imagined the sickening crack of bone, the chain pulling taut. The thought was a physical agony. This was not about a wild animal anymore. This was about a promise she never knew Thomas had made, but one she now felt compelled to keep. She could not let his legacy, this hidden, tender part of him, end in a bloody steel-toothed trap. Her indecision vanished, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. This was her home. This was her forest now, too. She walked to the coat rack and pulled on Thomas's old, heavy-duty rain slicker. It smelled of him, of countless rainy mornings in the woods. She went to his workshop, her flashlight cutting a steady beam through the gloom. Her eyes fell on a pair of heavy pliers and a long, sturdy screwdriver. His tools. Her hands closed around them. She was ready. Stepping outside was like stepping into another world. The rain came down in blinding sheets, and the wind tore at her, trying to rip the coat from her back. The night was absolute blackness, broken only by the wavering circle of her flashlight. Mud sucked at her boots with every step. She was 68 years old, and the forest floor was a treacherous landscape of slippery roots and unseen rocks. But fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. She kept the beam low, scanning the ground along the property line, her heart hammering in time with the roaring wind. She knew the path. She had walked it in her mind 100 times while reading Thomas's journal. After 10 minutes of desperate searching, the beam caught it. A faint glint of metal, half hidden under a spray of wet leaves. There it was, a leg-hold trap chained to the base of an oak tree. The circular steel jaws were open, waiting. A piece of raw chicken sat on the trigger plate, its scent sharp even in the rain. Bile rose in her throat. She knelt in the mud, her knees soaking through instantly. Her fingers, numb with cold, fumbled with the pliers. The mechanism was stiff. Rain poured down her face and into her eyes. She grunted with effort, trying to get a grip on the safety catch. A sob of frustration escaped her lips. "Come on," she whispered into the storm. She braced the screwdriver against the spring and pushed with all her weight. With a loud, metallic thwack, the jaws snapped shut, inches from her fingers. She gasped, falling back into the mud, her body trembling with adrenaline and relief. And in that exact moment, another flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, pinning her in its glare. "What in God's name are you doing?" A voice boomed over the storm. It was Garrett. He stood there, a towering silhouette against the thrashing trees, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. He started towards her, his boots squelching in the mud. "Have you lost your mind, Alara? You're trespassing. You're tampering with my property." Alara struggled to her feet, mud clinging to her, rain plastering her silver hair to her head. She was exhausted, cold, and terrified, but she held her ground. She held up the sprung trap. "You can't do this, Garrett," she yelled over the wind. "Not this one. Not this cat." "I can and I will," he roared back. "That cat is a menace. It's costing me money." Words were useless. Arguing was useless. He saw a pest. She saw a legacy. In a moment of desperate inspiration, she remembered. She reached into the deep inner pocket of Thomas's coat. Her fingers found the oilskin pouch where she'd wrapped his journal before leaving the house. She pulled it out and thrust it at him. "Read it," she screamed. Garrett stared at the journal as if it were a snake. "What is this? I'm not reading your diary in the middle of a hurricane." "It's not mine," she cried, her voice breaking. "It's his. It's Thomas's." That stopped him. He stared at the leather-bound book in her hand. He had known Thomas for 30 years. They had hunted together, respected each other. The anger on his face faltered, replaced by confusion. He hesitated, then took the journal from her hand, shielding it under his coat. He looked from the book to her mud-streaked face, to the trap in her other hand. He said nothing. He just turned and trudged back through the storm towards his own property. The next morning, the storm had passed. The world was washed clean and glistening. Alara walked stiffly to the property line. All of Garrett's traps were gone. That afternoon, Alara sat on her porch with a cup of hot tea, her muscles aching. She picked up the phone and dialed Chloe's number. When her daughter answered, her voice was cautious, guarded. "Mom, is everything okay?" "Everything is fine, Chloe," Alara said, her own voice calm and clear. And for the first time, she believed it. She didn't apologize or get defensive. She simply explained. She told her about Dr. Carter's visit, about the scientific terms, caching, provisioning instinct. She described the reality of the behavior, stripping away the fantasy Chloe had feared. Then she told her about Garrett, the traps, and the storm. She explained how she had taken Thomas's journal out into the rain. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Chloe finally spoke, her voice was soft, all the sharpness gone. "You went out in that storm? To save it?" "I had to," Alara said simply. "It was the right thing to do." Another pause. "I'm sorry, Mom," Chloe said, and the words were genuine. "I was scared. I thought I was losing you. I get it now. It's not about him. It's about you. Finding your own way." A week later, a package arrived from Atlanta. Inside was a high-end digital camera with a powerful telephoto lens and a note from Chloe. "If you're going to be a wildlife observer," it read, "you might as well do it right. I found a local nature photography group near you. They meet on Saturdays. I thought you might like it." Alara smiled, a true, unburdened smile. Following Dr. Carter's advice was the hardest part. She began the slow farewell. The first day she left only half the usual amount, the next day less. She started skipping days. The gifts on the boulder became less frequent. A single pine cone, a dried oak leaf. Then, one morning, she left a small piece of meat, and the next day it was still there, untouched. The gifts stopped. The conversation was over. A deep pang of loss echoed in her chest, but it was different from the grief she'd felt for Thomas. This was a quiet, necessary sadness. It was the pain of letting go, of setting something free. It was the right thing to do. The winter passed in a quiet rhythm of sketching, reading, and learning to use her new camera. She joined the photography group. She met people who spoke the language of light and shadow, who understood the patient art of waiting and watching. She was no longer just Thomas Vance's widow. She was Alara. Spring arrived, and with it, a vibrant explosion of life. The woods were no longer a place of sorrow or secrets, but a world of endless detail to be captured. One bright May morning, Alara was on her porch, her camera resting in her lap. She was watching the edge of the meadow where the forest began. And then she saw it. A flicker of movement. It was Ghost, sleek and powerful, stepping confidently into the sunlight. And behind her, tumbling and playing in the tall grass, were two tiny kittens. The bobcat paused at the edge of the trees. She turned her head and looked, for a long, quiet moment, in the direction of the cabin. Then, with a flick of her tail, she and her new family melted back into the deep green shadows of the forest. Alara raised her camera, but she didn't take a picture. Some things were meant only to be held in the heart. She lowered it and simply smiled, a feeling not of loss, but of profound, peaceful gratitude washing over her. The gifts had ended, but the true gift, the wild, unexpected connection that had guided her through the darkest woods of her grief, would remain with her forever. Was Garrett justified in setting the traps to protect his livelihood, even if it meant harming the bobcat?